Hello everyone, it's July 1st, 2020, and this is St. Mark's at Midweek. I'm Matt Wright, and today we visit with John Dale, longtime St. Mark's member and architect of our campus master plan. The way we use buildings and public spaces has changed dramatically during this pandemic, and John will talk about some of the ways that architects and planners are working to adapt schools, churches, and offices to our very different routines. But first, a welcome routine. Pastor Carrie is here to update us on the week at St. Mark's. Hi, Carrie.
Hi, Matt.
What are you doing? It's another beautiful summer day, and we're here out on my front porch again this week because this seems like the best of all possible places to chat and talk. How's St. Mark's?
St. Mark's is good, I think, for the most part. People seem to be hanging in there, and we seem to be staying connected. I know that I'm really hungry to see people and to worship with people, and that's unfortunately not possible to do in person. So we had hoped we were going to have some kind of an outdoor gathering beginning July 12th, but in the last week and a half, 2 weeks, it's become really clear that there's a surge in cases in our area, not just in LA County, but in our immediate area. There are rising numbers in our local hospitals. There are, more deaths. It's devastating. And so there's just not really a good argument for us coming back together in person right now.
Much as we'd like to.
I know. It's really hard. And I really ache to see everybody, and especially in worship. And it's just not something we're going to be able to do after all.
Yeah.
For now. So I think for the foreseeable future, likely through the summer, we're going to just need to stay with our online ways of being together, getting on the telephone and talking to one another, and taking care of each other, and staying apart again for the sake of love of neighbor, and for our own health's sake. So I'm sorry about it, and at the same time, really clear. I was gathered with the bishop and our clergy of the diocese. Every Thursday we get together, and
I see. Okay.
I've shared about that a little bit here. And so this past Thursday, in that gathering, it confirmed for me the rightness of this. Though we're not being ordered not to gather, most congregations are choosing to stay apart, especially given this surge in cases and the rising numbers. So, and we have the full support of our bishop in waiting. So that's what we're going to do.
When Marianne and I were engaged, as so many couples do, we went to an engaged encounter at the sponsored by the Catholic Church in Orange County, as it turns out. And one of the phrases that I remember from that seems to apply here is making a decision to love.
Yes.
And I, instead of feeling robbed of the opportunity to be with people I love to see and love to spend time with, I feel like we're all making a decision to love.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And we're seeing a lot of people making a different decision right now out in the world.
Yeah.
To devastating effect. I mean, it's just a clear connection between people flagrantly ignoring the orders or the strong recommendations to wear masks and the surge in cases, and people's real lives are at stake. So we are going to stay the course at St. Mark's, and I had hoped that the trend would be different and that we would be able to gather, but it's not. It's actually getting worse, and so all the more reason for us to do our part for as long as we need to keep people safe, to help reverse the trend.
Yeah. Well, you'll be announcing some plans here maybe later today. Today's July 1st, for how we are going to handle church on July 12th, and it may be a little different from just our normal podcast on Sundays.
Yeah, we're thinking about adding a little more interactive and live way for us to, not in person, but on Zoom. So we're going to figure some things out, and you'll hear about that real soon.
Good.
Other ways that we can continue to feel really connected in worship. So, yeah, we'll get there.
Good. I want to circle back to Lucy's interview a couple of weeks ago with Suzanne Edwards-Acton.
Yes.
And you have a little bit of an update on that. You've been working with, is it My Work to Do?
It's called My Work to Do.
Okay. And tell me about your experience with that and how it's going for you.
So you remember that one of the many hats that Suzanne wears is she has started this process called My Work to Do. It's a process that gathers primarily white people to gain resilience and muscle for having conversations about race. It's inward looking, and it's called Brave Space to have those conversations. And Suzanne and a few other Black leaders are in the room, facilitators, but it's primarily for white people to talk deeply and openly about systemic racism and their own experiences. And so I have been doing this now. It's a 5-week series, an hour and a half, once a week. And I'll be going to week 4 this Thursday. Mm-hmm. And it's been an incredibly rich and really helpful experience. And what I'm finding is that gathering and being intentional for an hour and a half a week changes the whole way I see the rest of the week. I'm much more awake to expressions of racism around me, to my own privilege as a white person, and it's incredibly helpful. And I think I like the name, My Work to Do, and this is really what we have to be doing now.
Yeah.
Engaging, waking up, doing our part, starting with our own lives and examining our own lives and our own, ways that we've contributed, intentionally or not, in systemic racism. And so I'm so grateful that Suzanne is doing this work. I'm on this call with some 50 odd people.
Really?
Yes. And this is just one group. Another one has started up on Mondays, and they have a great attendance at that as well. So it's really starting to expand. I'm really grateful for Suzanne for doing it, to making this. This has been going for a couple of years, I think. But they're really seeing, speaking of surges, they're seeing a surge of interest and real intention and commitment right now. And that's outstanding. So I strongly recommend people check it out. You can just Google one word, My Work to Do, and they'll be continuing to add new groups, and I can't recommend it more strongly.
Good. All right, well, have a good week.
Thanks,
have a good
Matt.
Independence Day.
You too.
And we'll talk again next week.
Thanks, Matt.
Now we turn our gaze towards space. Not outer space this time, but the spaces where we live, work, worship, and play. We've spent our whole lives using space pretty much the same way. We go to the store, the office, the bank, hotels, restaurants, and until 2020, we took that all for granted. Not anymore. How are we going to use these spaces in the future? Who figures that stuff out? The architect, that's who, and on the line right now is one of the best, John Dale. John is a principal and sector leader at HED Design, where he's created school campuses, worship spaces, government buildings, and commercial developments, all the places that seem to need rethinking for our new era. He's here to tell us what he's been thinking about. John, welcome to St. Mark's at Midweek.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
We know you as a fellow St. Mark's pew sitter, community member, church member, and a number of people know you from the master planning process that we went through here at St. Mark's. And your firm, HED, developed the master plan for our campus that we look forward to following through on here as circumstances permit. But I'm not sure that everybody knows how accomplished you are and how much experience you have in major architecture and design, particularly for community facilities, government, and schools, things like that, and also churches. I guess the obvious question is, what's changed for you and your work since March of 2020?
Well, a lot has changed and a lot hasn't changed. We've been fortunate to have remained busy and occupied and in connection with our clients. So there are very few who are backing away from what they had set out to do. And we, of course, do almost all our meetings virtually now, not unlike what we're doing right now, Matt.
Yeah.
We're using a conferencing software program that's easy to use and is pretty friendly. And the great thing is when we're in speaker mode, it almost is like we're talking face to face.
Right.
There are, of course, different phases you go through in looking for work and capturing and winning work. And so we've been trying to develop, better hone approaches, especially when we're doing interviews remotely. We still want to connect to people. We want to still try and talk to them face to face, eye to eye if we can. And that may or may not happen depending on who's controlling the software,
right?
Who's manipulating. But we think that we're fairly comfortable with it, and we think most of our clients are fairly comfortable. I remember right after the pandemic really became a crisis, we had a major client meeting with the folks at Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District, where we're doing a major new project. And we're going through programming, and programming is when you really talk about individual space needs, and there's a fair bit of detailed discussion. And we were doing a meeting with about 20 faculty. And so we actually organized a pre-meeting where people who hadn't been using Zoom could try it out. And we went through that, and we found that people got used to it very quickly. People were making comments in the chat column. We had a record of that, and individual people could speak and be heard very clearly. And when we put something in front of them to look at, they were able to watch. We have a consultant who does a lot of architectural programming, and she's very adept at just using very simple software, but moving things around in front of people, just making it happen, animating it, explaining things in a very direct way. So for the most part, it's worked.
And tell me about people's priorities in the last 3 months. How have client priorities changed? Are people really looking for different things? Do you find that people are coming to the table well informed? Do you find that the questions you're getting are incisive, or are you working harder to try to talk anxious people sort of down out of a place of concern and anxiety?
Well, we have people coming from all different points of view, and so we went through one meeting with the same client where we had some participating board members who were saying, "Why are we doing this? Why bother? Is anything going to be the same again? Maybe we should stop."
Mm-hmm.
And the response to which our facilities people, who are very motivated and very bright and have been overseeing a very large building program. The citizens of Santa Monica and Malibu recently renewed their commitment with a bond of over $500 million. So there's great commitment in that community,
Mm-hmm.
and the facilities people feel empowered. So they said, "No, we're moving forward," and we don't think things are going to be the way they are now forever, and we need to keep building for the future. And actually, since we have empty campuses, it's a great time to build. We can get a lot more done.
Right.
Safely and efficiently. So there are those debates. There is that underlying tension. But for the most part, we're fortunate to have a series of clients who are very motivated at continuing the work they set out to do, getting things done, and they're doing it with their eyes open and thoughtfully. And we're just continuing forward. There is, I mean, I think the second part of your question is, what does happen as the facilities we're designing or building are getting completed? Will they be occupied in the same way, at least in the near future?
Right.
And the answer is there are a whole lot of different opinions about what is going to happen, but there are some things in common. I think there is an assumption that there is going to be blended learning, that people are going to come back, but in reduced numbers. So they're going to come back in cohorts. Some students, maybe they're on certain days, other students on other days. A lot of people will continue to learn online, whether they take turns learning online or they choose to always learn online. Those choices are going to be present. And so we have to think about reconfiguring the learning spaces, adjusting the way they're arranged, making it possible for social distancing. And we have to start thinking about the protocols of cleaning and enhancing air quality. Touchless fixtures is something that, as we, most of the stuff I'm working on is too advanced to kind of revisit some of those things. But I think as we get into future designs, there are going to be more discussions about things like that, about the ritual of cleaning may become more integrated into the learning spaces themselves.
I was reading the article in the New York Times Magazine that came out in early June, and I was struck by the notion that where a design, sort of a design complication or something that really was important to take into consideration was what do you do with non-compliant bodies? And I guess in the traditional meaning, that would be people who have access problems, people in wheelchairs, designing bathrooms, and then most recently things like non-gender specific bathrooms, things like that. And yet now it's almost as if everybody's becoming a non-compliant body. And is that actually the case?
I think that's a really interesting point, and I think certainly we've already been in the process of creating more flexible facilities that can be used individually. So the idea of having non-specific gendered facilities that can be used by different people and maybe even can be assigned differently from time to time are pretty commonplace now. And in some of the buildings that we're working on, those features already exist, at least to some extent. So I think it's more, actually, when you started to ask that question, I was actually thinking one of the biggest challenges of social distancing are young children.
Oh, yeah.
There's a video from China that is out there that has gone kind of viral, where you see all these kids lining up perfectly spaced apart, 6 feet, all wearing shields, all wearing masks, all washing their hands frequently, all sitting apart in the classrooms in strict straight rows. And for, if you think about a child development center, if you think about the primary grades, that probably is going to be very hard to enforce.
Yeah.
And so then what else can you do? Well, you can reduce the density of people, the number of people attending at one time. You can get people more used to the idea of wearing masks because when you're in interior environments, you're not necessarily going to have the amount of fresh air and change of air that you'd like to have, because our mechanical systems are designed also to save energy.
Right.
Efficient. And that level of efficiency doesn't always give you the most aggressively cleansed and changed air that you would like to have. So there are enhancements to existing systems, ultraviolet light being used to help filter contaminants in filtering systems, but they're expensive to add. So I think we start with the basics. We start with breaking down the group size into smaller groups, and I think the next step is how do you blend learning so that people who are not in the room but are participating can be there at the same time as people who are in the room, and then they take turns, and then the teachers get to meet with all their students during the course of a week, and the students get used to the idea that they're sometimes watching from a bit of a distance and sometimes they're right. So I think there are social norms that are going to have to be gradually taught bit by bit, and I think that's the most important part. I mean, we can never do enough cleaning, we can never do enough filtering, we're never going to have the funds, especially with a depleted economy, to do all the things we should do perfectly. It's probably not going to happen.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about church and worship and those spaces, which are such communal spaces. And as we've learned in the last couple of months, churches without meaning to do almost everything wrong. People are singing, people are gathering closely, people are shaking hands. You know, the tradition at St. Mark's is that we all shake hands at the peace and hug one another, and the choir sings and everybody shouts for joy. And those things are all verboten now and will be for the foreseeable future. Do you see worship spaces changing in the long term, or is this something that we sort of have to deal with in the short term and then work out going forward?
Well, one of the things that I think maybe we have to build into our way of looking at things is the idea of changeability. You know, I think I'm a big proponent of what I call open building, which is designing buildings with change in mind, and designing change, not that every time you want to make a change you have to bring the architect back, but change that can happen more incrementally at a more basic level by the users and participants themselves. And so there are a few aspects when I think of worship. One is the idea that worship can be both inside and out, especially in the kind of climate we're blessed by.
Right.
We can do a lot to take advantage of the full campus in a creative way, to kind of spread out and be more distant when we need to. And I'm thinking there are going to be times when we can get back together, and then there are going to be times when we're going to have to pull apart again, because even if we beat this pandemic, there are probably going to be other things like it. So we might as well get used to that need for flexibility. And we've already proven we're really pretty resilient when you think about even what St. Mark's is doing on a weekly basis. There's good energy, there's good communication, there are things happening. That to me gives me a huge sense of optimism about the creativity and the capability and determination of a community. So if we sort of start to think about places of worship being more encompassing, being broader, more flexible, that's one thing. And then I think we can think about the sanctuary itself. And there have been discussions of pilot projects, things that we can do to kind of test the flexibility of the space. If we have, it may be time to get rid of pews, or a lot of them, and have chairs so the chairs can be closer together or further apart depending on the circumstances. So worship can be by application sometimes when you have a limited number of people that you can be in the space at any one time, and then it may be more spontaneous at other times. So I think if we can flex and think about the ebb and flow of life under constantly changing circumstances, we can figure out how to maintain, the centrality of our worship, the importance of the Eucharist, but find different ways of participating.
I want to ask you one last question before we go. And that is the change in building systems. It's already really happening, but I can imagine that systems for surveillance of all kinds are going to be even more present than we're used to. And there may be no corner of a building in the future that you can walk through or be in without having your temperature scanned or your whereabouts known or all of those things. Is that a concern for you as an architect?
Well, it is a little depressing and daunting to think of that kind of thing. Although, if we knew that by doing, I think there's certain things we may just have to accept. I think having your temperature taken in a kind of effortless way with a remote sensor that it doesn't even have to touch you, if that technology is perfected and can be done as a simple gesture, it may be a way of being greeted in the morning. I mean, maybe we can think differently about it so that it doesn't have to be a negative thing. I'm finding that the learning environments that we're doing now, the learning environments that are considered progressive, tend to have a greater degree of transparency as we think of students moving in and out of different kinds of spaces for different activities, working sometimes in small groups, working in bigger groups. And so the idea that there's kind of passive oversight, that a teacher can look through a window and see what some of the kids that she's sent off on a special project are doing outside the classroom, that can be done through architecture. It doesn't necessarily have to be done with security cameras. I think this idea of blended learning, where we're using technology to take people who are remote from the classroom together with people who are in the classroom, that does suggest maybe body cameras, maybe things that are more specific, that could be used in the wrong way or could be used in the right way. So I think it really becomes a question of how do we use this technology? Can we use it to create a sense of safety and security and togetherness as opposed to surveillance and watchfulness in a negative way? And I think that has to be part of a really transparent conversation. I think it has to be part of the culture of a community to understand what it all means. But I don't think there's an easy answer. I don't think this is going to be an easy journey, especially for a country of exceptionalists. Eric, we love our freedom, and we're actually paying for it dearly right now.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
And so we have to decide what we value. How can we put it in balance as a society? What does kindness mean? Is it a protective kindness? Is it an imposing kindness? I think all these things are things we have to talk more and more deeply about. And I think that will then lead to a subtle shift in the way we create environments for worship and fellowship and learning.
John Dale, thank you for joining us this week. I really appreciate it. And there are a million more questions I could ask you, so maybe we can connect again down the road.
Anytime. It's a pleasure. It's great to talk to you, Matt.
That's it for this edition of St. Mark's at Midweek. Thanks to our associate producers, Emily Wright and Lucy Grindon. Another update from St. Mark's next Wednesday and our regular worship podcast on Sunday, celebrating Independence Day. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and be good to each other. I'm Matt Wright.